Hello, hello, it's Mr. Shine here from HearthstonePlayers.com. I'm going to bring you what might be the last card reveal of the Goblins vs. Gnomes expansion before the release ends up happening. I have a feeling that the release is still going to be at least a week away because Blizzard had mentioned that they are going to let us know in advance. We're not just going to wake up one morning and find GVG is right on our doorsteps, which, as much as I wish that was the case, I think they're going to at least give us a week of notice so we can salivate even more. But as far as their website is concerned, we have the final card release that we know of now that they are giving us here, and it is a Paladin legendary card. The card is named Bolvar Fordragon. It is a 5-mana 1/7, which sounds awful, but when you look at the ability, it gets a little better. Whenever a friendly minion dies, while this is in your hand, gain +1 attack. So this is a very new concept. It's not something we've seen in any of the other card texts before. It's a card that actually changes while it's in your hand. I guess that's not entirely true. Giants cost 1 less for a card in your hand and things like that, so they do have a dynamic change as far as mana cost is concerned, but this card's attack actually changes as far as how many minions have died, kind of like minions that have been sent to your graveyard, if you are a Magic the Gathering fan, buffs the attack for Bolvar Fordragon. So I think the idea of this card is because Paladin has a lot of cheap minions, it has a lot of token minions with the Silverhand Recruits, as a lot of the themes can be either very aggressive or you can play control and you bring out a whole lot of 1/1s. As time goes on, if Bolvar Fordragon is in your hand for a long time, it continues to increment in damage. And maybe if you want to play it very much in the late game, it can be a super strong card. I mean, I'm sure it could be above 10 attack when you play it, which of course a 10/7 for 5 is pretty good deal. Or you can play it on curve if you have it in your starting hand, and it will probably end up being a 4 or 5/7, which is still fairly decent, although Fugan is a 4/7 for 5 mana that has a death rattle for summoning Thaddeus already, so it's not unheard of as a 4/7 for 5. 5/7 would be a little bit better. You can get the sense of what this card is trying to do. My concern is that it's not going to do it very well. The reason I say that is because you don't want to have a 5-mana minion in your starting hand. Even if it does turn into a 4 or a 5/7 on turn 5, it's a little bit better than the general curve, but that means that your early game will be stunted because you won't have as many options to play 1, 2, and 3, and 4 drops, which are the things you want to be playing. By the time you end up playing Bolvar Fordragon, and if you happen to have it be a 5/7 or even a 6/7 or a 7/7, if you've lost board by that point, it doesn't really matter how big it's going to be at that point, and you are probably going to lose anyways. The downside of Bolvar Fordragon, if you do not have it in your starting hand, is it's a terrible top deck, especially in the late game, where it is basically a 1/7 for 5, which is awful, hideous, very bad. Worse than Mogutian Warden, it's a 1/7 that doesn't even have Taunt and it costs 1 more mana. That's garbage. But it's probably not always going to be that. That's the worst case scenario, but it's more likely that it will be like a 2/7 or a 3/7, which is fairly underwhelming as far as stats are concerned. It's not terrible, but again, it's not really what I'd expect out of a legendary card. But that is not even the worst part about this card. The worst part is it is silenceable, per Ben Brode. He confirmed on Twitter that you can silence Bolvar Fordragon down to its 1/7 base damage. So it's a buff that gets added on top. It's not something that it transforms like a Druid minion, Druid of the Claw, that turns into a 4/6. It doesn't get some sort of buff that can be silenced. So it is considerably worse than even if it was just a 5/7 coming onto the board, because it has a lot of downside. It can be played around, and of course a 1/7 does very little to impact the board in general. All in all, I think this card is actually quite poor. I think that this card is worse than many other options that are already out there for 5 mana. I would much rather have a 5/5 Stranglethorn Tiger with Silence that is more consistent. I would much rather have a Ventricle Mercenary that's going to be a 7/6 for 5 mana that has that downside, but immediately is always going to have that threat. It's not going to need to build up in your hand and wait a long time. Like I said, I think that it's an interesting idea. The concept is cool, and I think that there is a chance that maybe if this gets tweaked, or we see other cards that have similar effects, they could have use, but I think this card, especially as a legendary card, is really not something that finds much of a place. If I was forced into trying to play Bolvar Fordragon and thinking of a deck to play it in, I think there are one of 2 ways to go. You could either play a deck that focuses on a lot of token minions. You could get some Echoing Oozes, so the 1/2s that summon themselves a duplicate copy. You can get a lot of Silverhand Recruit summoning. You can get other token minions, even maybe like Murloc Tidehunter. Oh gosh, that would be pretty sad if you just bring a Murloc Tidehunter in your deck. But I mean, there's a lot of other minions that have a chance to have, that they summon additional buddy. Things like the new Sky, the piloted Shredders and things like that that have a Death Rattle that summons another thing. Certainly Death Rattle minions in general, things that have just The idea, if you'd want to play a deck that's fast-paced, is to get a lot of minions that have other minions and just have a lot of things die, so then you can just boom, drop a bomb, and turn 5 or maybe a little bit later, have it get a little bit of value from that. The other option would be to play a control paladin, where you are trying to go into the late game, and the idea is to hold on to Bolvar Fordragon for as long as possible until maybe they've expended their resources, maybe you've gone really deep, you've summoned a lot of recruits, a lot of things have died, you've played a quality consecrate, wiped your board, their board, and then when they are getting exhausted, you just drop this guy that's going to have like 15 to 20 damage, which, you know, could be a win condition card, but I think that would need to go into the way, way late game for it to be this kind of one-shot wonder that you hope they can't kill with a big game hunter or a silence. And if they can't, then you win the game, but otherwise you have to go a long way just to get to that point. So all in all, I actually give this card a 2 out of 5 stars, only because, again, it's a new concept, it's kind of neat, so it's hard to really say how this is going to look. It has potential, but I think there are so many other options that are much less clunky and are much more easy to play on curve, or to not have to. It's really just an all-in card, is my point. It does not do enough, and it's really just a dude that does not impact the board immediately and can be dealt with by your opponent in a variety of ways. That is what I have today. I hope the other legendaries and the other cards we see as we go forward are a little bit better than this guy. Although I will say that Paladin's gotten a decent amount of love with some of the other cards, and they already have Tyrion Fordring too, so, you know, they don't need another awesome legendary at this point, I guess. I, again, am excited for Goblins vs. Gnomes. I think it's coming out pretty soon now, and I'll see you guys next time!